to The Unscripted Pharmacist. I'm Kyle, your host, and I have with me today Gary Fetke, and I'm coming to you from Headwaters, which is a paddleboarding as well as a kayak shop here in Rancho Cordova, Sacramento. And I have Gary Fetke. Now, Gary doesn't know, but I've put him somewhat on a pedestal because he's a great example. And he's one of the pioneers to me since I've been on this journey since 2013. So many of his old videos, as well as an amazing book, Inversion, have been on the same focus that I have been on, which is discovering conflicts of interest. And Gary's been on this for quite some time. And I would have to say, it's people like you, and I would have to call out, Sarah Hallberg, who said, ignore the guidelines. As a diabetes educator, it's not always insulin with an A1C of 9. It's not always about using medications to treat diagnoses. So here I've been a pharmacist for so long, and it was always like matching the diagnosis with the drugs. And it was about memorizing charts, but no one ever told me root cause. And Gary's been on that trek for quite some time. He has his own personal health story as a cancer survivor, as well as an orthopedic surgeon dealing with the hospital and dealing with the problems that come from being bold and speaking out against the dogma, the clinical dogma of the day, which is just, shall I use your favorite word, maybe rubbish?
I've got
Gary,
a few.
I want to quote you.
A few favorite words. I have a lot of favorite words.
Okay, so here's a quote. Here's a quote from you. You ready for this one? Okay, so science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. And this hits home. Once you see the health benefits of LCHF, you can never unsee them.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, what does that mean to you from a personal perspective and professional perspective?
Well, first of all, you should get a real life and take me off the pedestal, okay? Hopefully after our discussion, you'll realize that I'm just like Joe Blow. Maybe not in the orthopedic world, because
you're bold and courageous.
No, I'm
a bold and courageous person is a superhero.
Yeah, so I just think that I've been trying to do the right thing. I know I'm not. It's not. I'm quite humble about all this. And it's a bit like you say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's like a lot of things in life. But in this particular forum, when we're surrounded by a society with metabolic health problems, and you've got an opportunity to empower the patient to make them lifestyle changes, and they can turn around their health problems without drugs. Well, I've just broken about 4 rules of the current sickness model that we're actually been working under. A, do not give the patient information. B, do not empower the patient, because most people are disempowered. They live in fear of the doctor, or I often talk about it like being in a pinball machine. Once you're caught up in the system, you're just bouncing from one medical appointment or one test to the next, and you're so dependent on what is coming. Your anxiety levels go up, all sorts of other stress hormones kick in. We do put doctors up on pedestals when one of the things that over the last 20 years, I've lost a lot of respect for my colleagues. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's actually in a professional way. If you don't follow scientific rigor and you don't do what's the right thing by your patient, then you're screwing up. So, one of the great things I've come to recognise is I've said I'm sorry, I got it wrong. And it's a basic parenting skill. Have you got kids?
Yeah, so, I have grandkids just like you.
So therefore, one of the things with raising children is you sort of say to them, actually, no, you've done the wrong thing. That's a mistake. Admit that you've done the wrong thing, learn from it, and move on. That's called basic parenting. One of the problems in medicine is that the vast majority of doctors really struggle to say, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. No matter how they got it wrong, and then move on. So the last time the medical profession actually ever said sorry was over thalidomide, and we're going back 50, 60 years when, look, I'm sorry, pregnant women were prescribed thalidomide and birth defects followed on from that. Probably only about 10 to 15,000, according to the literature, of children were affected, or now adults, which is nothing in comparison to the tsunami of modern diseases out there that we're actually causing harm. So I come back to that basic premise, and you've quoted me on, like, science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. That is my take on something really simple, which is called evolution. Whether or not it's called the scientific method. Like, we have evolved by constantly challenging what we've done before, learned from that, tweaked it, moved on, and that's called evolution. In science, that is, like, science theoretically stands there to be disproven. No science is ever solved, and the moment you've actually believed that that's the end game, we've solved the problem, we haven't. We haven't. You've got to stand there and defend your hypothesis. I remember having a dinner.
Lost that.
Oh no, it's completely gone. But so if it's gone, you've got to work out why it's gone. So this is so for the whole concept of low carb, healthy fat in a hard. If you're going harder core, it's keto. In a harder core form, it's carnivore. But as a dietary, like a lifestyle. But realistically, all we're talking about is going back to eating whole food and unprocessed food, or minimally processed food.
Yep.
So, one of my other quotes,
no sugar.
Well, I've rewritten the dietary guidelines for the world. I don't know if you've seen that quote, because we complicate everything. And I got into trouble with the medical board because I've been for making things too simple so people could understand. I'm not making that up. I literally got reprimanded.
But that's your job.
I know. But what I'm sort of saying is the medical board.
Your job, the doctor, is to teach.
Yes. Thank you for knowing that. Most doctors have no idea what the Latin mean is to teach. Docere is to teach. You get a doctorate. We're not there to care for people. We're not there to heal them. We're not there to make money. We're not there to operate or medicate or, pharmacize them. We're there to teach them. That's the basic. So, we've run off on a tangent. The yeah, so I can remember having this dinner in New York with I won't mention their names because I don't want to. They're good friends, but essentially, I actually took to them and said, "Well, actually, the scientific method is now so flawed, we've abandoned it, that I now think the null hypothesis is null and void." And it went. They took the bait on that, and it got quite a heated discussion for about 10 minutes. And then Belinda, who was sitting beside me, said to them, "Guys, he's from Australia. He's just baiting you, and you've taken the bait. Everyone settle down." But to be fair, I'll still take the argument. I actually do think we've thrown the scientific method out the window. So that's really interesting because I call it. There's a talk of mine on YouTube, and I gave a similar presentation to a few hundred medical students a couple of weeks ago. And they had open minds, which I was delighted to see. But essentially, it's the failure of our medical education. So if we've completely abandoned holistic health, and we've and I'll say almost completely, we talk about, lifestyle and all that sort of thing, but realistically, we've abandoned that. A lot of our work's been to try and work out why we've abandoned it and how we abandoned it. And that's where you come back to vested interests. And when you find out that, I call it generational education, the problem is for you and myself is that we believe our teachers, and they believe their teachers, and they believe their teachers before them. So that most of it, the ailments in our sickness industry actually date back to temperance movement ideals in the mid-19th century. So the start of our downfall goes all the way back to that time frame. And so therefore you can sort of see, once you understand history, you don't repeat it, which is what society does all the time, but the history of our medical education. In fact, so 1910, have you heard of the Flexner Report?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm totally with you on the Seventh-day
Okay.
Adventist involvement in
All
the
right.
food pyramid. This
So
is you know what though? I don't think that too many people really know this. And that's kind of why we're here. Because I don't think people realize that we've been following the Garden of Eden, no blood shall be shed diet since the beginning, and we've had no clue. So
well,
this is
animals in
obviously
the
this is
wild don't have.
Belinda's wheelhouse.
Oh yeah, well, the animals in the wild don't have dietary guidelines. You know, you don't find fat
They
animals
know what
unless
to eat.
they know what to eat, and they rarely gorge themselves until they start raiding human rubbish bins.
Yeah. They're not fat.
Well, they do get fat. You know, for winter hibernation, they've got a process
Right.
in there.
But not like us.
No, because they do hibernate afterwards. You know, they don't have access to food for a few months.
Right.
But I mean, in nature, that's a really wonderful thing to look at, because what is it that drives behavior to actually create that eating behavior? And Rick Johnson, who's a nephrologist, has done a lot of work around. He's written a book called Obesity Code, good book.
Nate,
and
Nature
Rick,
Wants Us Fat.
Yeah, and that's his latest book. But I can remember him giving me a copy of
Yeah.
Obesity Code years ago. But essentially, in nature, we're driven. So in hibernation, we actually get, once we start burning off our fat, and just when we start to burn protein, that's enough of a stimulus with rising cortisol levels to wake us out of hibernation. We then go on a frenzy to try and start foraging for food. And then as you head towards that going into hibernation, that's the time when our fruits get on the trees. The end of winter, beginning of autumn, the end of summer, beginning of autumn, the fruit ripens. The sugar in that, particularly the fructose component of it, then drives behavior to gorge ourselves to go into winter hibernation. And that happens in society 365 days of the year. So we've got totally stressed out lives where our cortisol levels are up. And so that gives us erratic behavior, wakes us up, keeps us alert, and becomes stressful in itself. And high cortisol levels have got their own side effects. But then we've actually got this exposure to ultra-processed food, which is primarily, it has significant amounts of sugar and particularly fructose in it. And fructose just in itself will drive a whole lot of eating behaviors right down the pathway to making us obese. My brain is functioning. I could remember the other thing. I've rewritten the dietary guidelines for the world, which it all comes back to this. Don't stop me whilst the memory's working.
I've got so much stuff.
Yeah. Because if we're looking for a simple answer, the simple answer is this. It's called eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food based on your culture and environment, avoiding added sugar and processed food. That is the evolutionary diet. As Ken Berry will say, it's the proper human diet. It's actually, when you break that down, I've described LCHF, I've described a ketogenic diet, I've described a carnivore diet. I have not described the standard American diet, Australian diet, that food pyramid diet. And I don't know if you've heard me say, if you eat by the food pyramid, you're going to die by the food pyramid. And along the way, you're going to look like the food pyramid. Yeah. And
And you're going to keep grazing.
Oh, well, animals graze on grains, that's on paddocks and whatever. I don't know which path you want to go down. I mean, the trouble is that damn food pyramid, and that, which is the basis of, even though they've changed it to the food plate in the US and they've changed it to the dietary guidelines here, healthy eating guidelines, it's still based around a significant amount, if not the majority, actually based upon cereals and grains and highly processed food and an avoidance of fresh, local, seasonal. Whichever plate, looking at whichever guideline, I've actually said in the Australian one, I've actually said you need to send out a search and rescue party to find the meat on the Australian guidelines one. Like it's so
Some
hard to find
places
it.
have nothing. Food
Whereas
desert in
processed food is
cities.
literally shotgunned across the whole lot.
Absolutely.
So if, and I talk about that analogy that will look like the food pyramid and die by the food pyramid. The trouble is, since we've introduced those dietary guidelines and our predominantly leaning towards this food pyramid, which was completely manipulated, the information behind it, we have gotten fatter and sicker as a society. And, one of the things that the system, the dietitians associations, whether or not it's the US and Australia, Canada, South Africa, England, have all said, it's because people aren't following the guidelines. Well, I've got great data out of the US comparing our food intake in the 70s and in the teens. 2019, I think, was the last data.
Right.
And we have, over that period of time, followed the dietary guidelines. We have decreased our intake of red meat. We've increased our intake of fruit and vegetables and cereals and grains and nuts and plant foods. And it's just gross data. Those have gone up and those have gone down.
Right.
And so we have, as a society, or particularly in the US, that's where the best data comes from on this, followed the dietary guidelines. And yet, what an abject failure. Fatter, sicker, metabolically unwell, polypharmacy, multiple drugs, multiple complications. Take one drug, get side effects, take another drug to prevent the side effects of the other one.
Yeah.
And you'd be well aware, the whole origins of the pharmaceutical industry, not just Flexner, Carnegie, Rockefeller in 1910, but they develop these drugs, find out that they've got complications, and as a result of the complications, market those complications to become the pharmaceutical drug of choice for that condition that needs that complication.
I think you and I have done some significant damage to the pharmaceutical industry. I wonder how many surgeries you've prevented, how many prescriptions are not filled. I mean, I hope that you and I can someday put a dent in this profit that they continue to share with.
It's hard to put a figure on. I'd like to think of tens of billions, but I know at least of millions. So
it's expanding.
The Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturers Forum used to meet every 3 months at Concord Golf Club and sit down and discuss industry tactics. So here in Australia, that included Kellogg's, Nestle, Sanitarium, Freedom Foods, and the head of the Food and Grocery Council. And they'd sit down and discuss. So, everyone says, the meat industry is powerful. Well, no, that's literally just like herding cats. They've so many different bodies. They are not organised. Yet we've got the breakfast cereal industry literally sitting down with their CEOs and their chief legal officers and having lunch every 3 months to work out what's happening with the market. In some of those documents, which we're not hackers, but they literally fell out of the internet, were the minutes there saying, in Australia and New Zealand, breakfast cereal sales are down because of the concepts of low carb, paleo, keto.
And Gary Fetke.
And we are therefore should target these 7 people, of which I'm the only Australian doctor on that list. So part of me is very proud to be on that list. The other part of me is SHIT scared to be on that list.
Yeah.
Some of my talks,
but it changed your career.
Well,
I mean, this has been a huge silver lining for you.
Philosophically, yes. I think we've been able to, and our, conversations like this, Twitter, social media, YouTube, means that I actually reach more people every day through social media than I do in a lifetime of surgery. And I went to
Right.
a retirement do for one of our team, our plaster technician. It was, and no, I went to that last night, and he said, "Do you miss surgery?" And I went, "Yes, but I think we're doing greater good."
Cool.
And he said,
Yeah.
he said,
Preventing
look, he was
them.
very kind. He said, "Look, I was a great surgeon," which is very kind because when you're a surgeon, you're just trying to do your job. The great thing I've taken out of surgery is arrogance, because you've got to be arrogant to be a surgeon. You've got to back yourself. And the thing and I don't mean that badly, because it is a lifetime of actually backing yourself, that you've got the surgical skill to do something with your brain and your hands to actually, because you're isolated in an operating theatre. You've got to back yourself. So one of the great things about all this low carb stuff is I kept coming back to the biochemistry. I was right. You can't argue with biochemistry. And so I was arrogant / naive enough to keep going. I'm not stupid, but I'm clearly naive. I thought all of this was going to be over in months when I worked out the fructose metabolism pathway. Probably I am stupid. It's literally, this is so, as you come back to it, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I couldn't work out why my colleagues kept operating. Like if we actually reduce sugar and carbs, most osteoarthritis symptoms, particularly of the knee, get better. So I'd get my patients to go low carb keto. I'd say, "Okay, I'll see you in 8 weeks." And the majority of them had such a symptomatic improvement that before they lost weight, that they didn't need the operation. They still ultimately needed it in a year or 2 or 3 or 4. But they were in much better metabolic health by that time than if I'd operated then. But then there's a whole lot of patients who couldn't put up with me. And I understand that. And they'd go along and see my colleagues, and they'd have their operations at 250
Okay.
pounds and struggle.
Right. Your criteria was very different. Your criteria is very different for who you would do surgeries on. And so this is a concept that I think this is coined by you, and that is that people are training for their knee replacement. Right?
I
Where
get it. Yeah, I'd say.
What does that mean to you?
Joint replacement's big surgery, and it's fabulous. In the 20th century, it was deemed the hip replacement was deemed the most beneficial operation of all medicine. For taking people, and I've had my hips replaced. And I finally had mine done, despite good metabolic health, when I could not walk across the waiting room, and I had to walk our daughter down the aisle 3 months later. I could not walk 10 meters.
Wow.
I rang up one of my colleagues, said, "Okay, let's do it." He said, "Okay, well, one of the good things with orthopedic surgeons and mates is you can ring up and they can shift things around and you get things done. That is helpful."
Nice.
So a lot of people said I'd make my patients suffer to get across the lot, and I said, but when you get there, you are going to need the operation, you're going to want the operation, and you're going to be metabolically well, and you're going to fly through it. And as a result, I ended up with a low complication rate. But some patients said I made them, look, I play golf, which I find is a fascinating game. You might meditate out on the wakeboard, but I'm actually meditating on the golf course.
I don't know how, because it's got to be so frustrating.
No, it's actually spiritually cleansing when you hit the ball properly. But I regularly see people out on the golf course who tell me, "Oh, I'm going to have my knee replacement next week." And I said, "What the hell are you doing out here?" And I said, "If you can," I don't get into trouble with my colleagues. I said, "If you can get around and play 18 holes of golf, walking, even in a cart, cancel your operation. Just cancel it. You're not bad enough." "Oh, no, it's really sore." It's not bad enough. And part of that is coming all the way back to obesity, diabetes, complications of surgery. For many years, I had a practice of cleaning up all the deep infections and complications. And over my right shot, right there, you can see there's a golden toilet brush.
Yeah, I see.
And I very proudly have that in my life because my registrars, called residents in the US, they gave it to me because I got to clean up all the, of my colleagues. Yeah, and I think after 30 years of surgery, the registrars, the trainees, would send patients that they didn't know what to do to my clinic. I don't know if I heard my clinic's was called Fetke's Effed Up Fructose-Free Fungating Foot Folly Fridays. But I never quite worked out what effed up meant.
I'll help you.
But so I would regularly get patients with complications. So, like I'd say to people, if you had a knee replacement and you've got diabetes and you're obese and your diabetes is out of control, are you willing? I know you're booked in for a knee replacement. Are you willing to have your leg amputated? And they said, stop being dramatic. I said, no, I'm the guy that regularly amputates legs for the complications of deep infection and joint replacement. If a joint replacement goes wrong, there will be someone out there who knows someone who's had a joint infection go wrong. It rarely kills them. It just makes their life a complete and utter misery. They become dependent on the system, multiple washouts, multiple deep operations, antibiotics forever, the complications of antibiotics, drugs, hospitalisation. It is a misery. So I felt quite strongly about saying, okay, let's optimise the patient before. So it's interesting. I gave a talk to a few hundred knee surgeons a few years ago, where I essentially said, if you operate on obese patients and you haven't optimised their clinical situation before surgery, you are negligent. I nearly got shot. I then got asked to give that same talk about 4 years later, of which half the audience got it. If you operate on someone with significant obesity, body mass index more than 35 to 40 with comorbidities, in particularly diabetes, then that person has a higher rate of complications of deep infection, longer operations, bigger transfusions, longer hospitalizations, failure of the joint replacement. That is the same higher risk as operating on a patient without antibiotics, without a sterile theatre, and not washing the skin beforehand, and not operating in a clean theatre. So if I went and operated and didn't wash my hands, didn't give you perioperative antibiotics, and didn't actually wash the leg down properly with antiseptic, and then didn't give you anti-clotting medication, I would be sued. Yet the complications of operating on someone with obesity is greater than all of that combined. So it's just a numerical argument. You would sue me if I did the former, but you're not going to sue me, and you're going to tell me that I'm politically incorrect and I'm fat shaming if I say, no, that person's got super obesity and I want to actually treat that person's obesity before joint replacement. And that's all I did. Oh, here's a tangent for you. Fat shaming. You allowed to fat shame?
No. No, we don't do fat shaming here.
No, but why not?
Well,
I didn't even know. I didn't even.
Fat shaming, openly fat shaming. No, we don't do that here in the U.S. You will get a whole lot of crap for doing that.
Yeah, why not?
It's a body positivity thing. Let's all accept.
I get it.
Unhealthiness as the norm. If you come to our stores, you will see large size models. It is, and I will ask people like, "Hey, do you recognize? I mean, this is the new norm here. How did we transition to this without really actually realizing? Imagine, like, okay, so I don't know if you watched Leave It to Beaver, but I'm old enough to know about Leave It to Beaver and Mr. and Mrs. Cleaver. Imagine them, like, who, like, they always wore the same waist. They always had the same waist size all throughout their shows. They never gained a pound. Uh, Imagine if they could look at us now. What would they think of us now? They would be like, are you guys still the same species? Like, how did you get so big? Like, you know about the movie Wall-E. We have, like, slowly, incrementally, just not unnoticeably small, tiny little increases in our weight, in our sickness, and we're completely oblivious to it going around us 24/7. Right? Like,
so, yeah,
but the reason why I think fat shaming is wrong is that they are not to blame. Nobody is to blame. You know it. I know it. Not their fault. They just didn't know, and neither did their doctor. Right? The doctor
it's such a huge
doesn't know what you know.
It's a huge topic, but so I used to get really cranky at obese people. But as I've been on my journey, I now realize it's a system problem. It's our educational problem. It's our guideline problem, and it's how we educate our children. We've got Disney movies showing cows, not and aren't animals. You can't eat animals. It's all about veganism, whatever. However, I'm fat because I was giving a lecture. Again, this is the arrogance. I gave a talk on how to manage diabetes to 40 to 50 endocrinologists. Like, tell them how to suck eggs.
Wow.
I was huge invited
impact.
To speak.
That's
it was that evening was the shitstorm it turned out to be. Belinda watched it on Zoom, and she said I was incredibly well behaved, as it was fairly heated from the floor. But nonetheless, that was almost an impetus for us to actually change the dietary guidelines for diabetes here in Australia. And now that the endocrinologists think low carb, it's their idea, and all that was happening is I was presenting the data, which I'm part of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners in the US, an Australian arm is developed here. Adele Height, who pretty well is instrumental in writing the diet guidelines for diabetes, of which we have lots of co-authors, but Adele unfortunately passed away. But her legacy is such a powerful document. But we've got that into the whole guidelines. But I'm going to keep but I was accused in that talk of fat shaming. And I went, I've never fat shamed. I've had people tell me, patients tell me, that when I've spoken to them about their weight, that was the nicest way they've ever been told they're fat. So I'm actually respectful of people and understanding that in a disempowered system, that if you can empower them, that's not fat shaming, that's empowering people. Anyway, fat shaming. I'll finish.
But that's their perception, though. Right. That's their perception.
But I
find that if you say the word obesity or overweight, they internalize it immediately and take offense to it. And the reality is, this is the condition. This is what we're calling it. It's not somebody's fault. It's not your fault if you don't know. I think ignorance is unfortunately on the part of the physician that has been told and shown this is root cause. If you are going to ignore what I'm saying, that's complete ignorance, and it's your arrogance that's getting us to where we are today. So an opportunity to talk to a lot of endocrinologists is that's pretty nice.
But I was accused of fat shaming.
Go, Gary.
But the important thing about fat shaming is if you because I went, I'm not a fat shamer. I'm actually trying to help people. So lo and behold, obesity is a lifestyle-related condition, and it requires a lifestyle-related solution. Ultimately, with the right information, support, accountability, motivation, you can turn a lot of it around. As it turns out, the literature about fat shaming and stigmatization of obesity, if you go back for the last 10 years, has been largely funded by a little company called Novo Nordisk. And Novo Nordisk produce drugs called Ozempic and Wegovy. And if you can turn a lifestyle condition requiring a lifestyle solution into a medical problem which you don't blame anyone for, and it requires a medical treatment at tens of $1,000s per annum, an incredible cash cow, then you will become a very wealthy company. Novo Nordisk is now Europe's most valuable company on the and they can't. It's hard to get Ozempic in Europe. It's mostly sold off-label around the west of the world, and they're in the US. So what I'm sort of saying is that whole fat shaming, because it's literally a term. I'm old enough to go. We've had obesity around forever, in some respects. Fat shaming, yes, I might have subconsciously fat shamed people in the past before I knew all this stuff, but I've never gone out of my way to fat shame a patient. But now I'm going to fat shame Novo Nordisk. But I'm going to fat shame Novo Nordisk.
Fantastic.
Because,
good job.
Once you realise that this is disinformation, which has become part of our culture, and I wasn't setting you up for it, because fat shaming's bad, I agree. But the concept of it, and the materialisation and the medicalisation of it and the pharmaceuticalisation, which is not a word,
I like it though,
comes down to a pharmaceutical company that's selling a drug off-label and I think Ozempic's a terrible drug in diabetes management. I think it's doubling down once you start using it in obesity, because every single medication in diabetes is there because of the carbohydrate you eat. It's either about reducing the glucose that comes into your body, peeing it out, pooing it out, or shifting it around. And if you don't eat it, if you don't eat carbs, of which there's no biochemical requirement for it, based on science, then you don't need the medication. And every single person who goes low carb with their type 2 diabetes, and predominantly type 1 in a supervised fashion, has a reduction in their medication use. And if you don't do it, if it doesn't work for you, then you're not doing it. It's one of Eric Westman's comments. Right. I mean, Eric says, if low carb is not working for you, you're not doing it. I'm a bit kinder than Eric.
You're not doing it right. Right.
Well,
if your triglycerides don't drop like a rock, then you're not doing it. That's kind of my rule as well. And if you're not in ketosis, you're not doing it either.
I think if you're not losing weight,
I want to get back to Novo Nordisk.
Oh no, they finished with them because they're just a little company.
Okay, We've got to take. Oh, come on! How did they ended up on our 60 Minutes here?
Mm-hmm.
The puppet. Oh, can I say this?
It's all money.
A certain person. Yeah, she said it was genetics. But how did you get on 60 Minutes and 60 Minutes didn't do their homework and know that this particular obesity doctor was going to say that it's genetic, and she just took significant amount of money from Novo Nordisk, and she got on 60 Minutes and she's telling the world that, if your parents are fat or obese, you will be obese too. There's nothing you can do about it.
Because you've got for a couple of generations now, we've been eating breakfast cereal. Yeah. And so it's a generational eating habit. It's not a generational. I recognize there are epigenetics and whatever, but that's just a cop-out clause. Because even if you've got bad epigenetics,
feed or soil.
You can, even if you've got bad genetics, a bad family history, you have the ability to put the right fuel in your body to minimize the effect of that genetic predisposition to whatever. And I'm not saying you cure every single genetic disease, but the ones that are related to metabolic health or have implications in metabolic health, genetic, epigenetic, are going to benefit by having good metabolic better metabolic health and putting the right fuel in the body. Most people pay more
And I would
attention to
love to
what
say
fuel.
movement is medicine, right, Gary? Can I say that?
Oh,
Or am I? Oh,
you can,
do I have
but
to?
okay. Well, you've got to declare your conflict of interest if you're going to say that.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay,
I
so
just received
I'm a great
thousands,
believer.
millions of dollars from Coca-Cola to say that.
Yes, you know that. You know the origin of exercise is medicine.
Ah,
Exercise is
makes me
medicine.
furious because I say it myself.
The formation of the American Society of Sports Medicine had their initial funding from Coca-Cola, which is, back to the Olympics and, health washing their message once again. And they had their seed funding and Coca-Cola patented the term exercise as medicine.
Ah,
The
makes you
bastards.
sick.
Um,
Hey, how about also Coca-Cola's involvement with ILSI, International Life Science Institute, this nonprofit institute that basically challenged and had this sugar sweetened beverage tax repealed in Mexico. And ILSI is basically just Coca-Cola's nonprofit arm.
ILSI was started by Coca-Cola. There was significant funding initially, and they're right across the world. So whenever the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry's scientific arm pops up, and it's not just Coca-Cola. I mean, the big pharmaceutical industries are in there. All the big food players are in ILSI. And it's their science washing of messages. It's like the fat shaming. Oh, I haven't, off the cuff, I haven't tracked Novo Nordisk, ILSI fat shaming. But they're the same players using the same tactics over and over and over.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. We blame the tobacco industry for all of their nastiness and suppression of the information about tobacco. Do you know who taught them that? Coca-Cola. So if we go back to the perils of sugar, cocaine, and Coca-Cola were noted back in the early 1900s. And Belinda, off the top of her head, will give you the name of the person who was trying to drag that through Congress. And ultimately, he was smashed so much by the system and the money and the paybacks that he actually resigned from Congress and started writing articles for women's magazines about the perils because he realised he's not going to get it through the government. So he started writing articles about the perils of sugar in women's magazines because, again, without being sexist, they were the ones who were reading about what food to put on the table. So, again, you've got to work these back. So the concepts of social media, even back then, have meant that we've actually been able to gain traction. So the concepts of low carb and keto and therapeutic carbohydrate reduction and low carb are now in the mainstream, not because the government have pushed it, not because of the food industry have pushed it. The food industry have come along on the ride now with all these crap foods and processed foods, which are low carb bars, and protein bars and keto bars. Don't have them,
Yeah.
But nonetheless,
it's still ultra processed food, and you should measure and you should know what your blood sugar is doing by wearing a continuous glucose monitor. What do you think of the new DGA for 2025? You've seen the list, so I think it'd be really. This is just me, but I think it'd be really hilarious to sit down with you and Belinda at dinner, and we were talking about what did you find today, honey? Well, you know what? I discovered this. How did you, you guys probably have these almost dirty little secrets about what you discovered about the pharmaceutical or the food industry on a regular basis. So for the common listener, because where should they go to dig up conflicts of interest similar to what you guys do? Because I think everyone should take some responsibility and go.
Call Belinda. I mean, I just dropped her in there. But in the speakers around the world, if you're going to enter into a debate I say call Belinda to find out who you're debating against before, so you find out their conflict of
Right.
interest. A lot of people actually don't even realise what hat they wear, what their conflict of interest is. So if you have an opinion, and we'll take on the vegan. If you're a vegan and you have an opinion about being a vegan, I get it that you've got an opinion, and I respect the fact that you're trying to make a difference to yourself and society and the environment. But do you realise that you have become a foot soldier for the propaganda put forward by the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Because every single vegan argument can be debunked. There's actually more harm done to our environment by our food production of cereals and grains and cropping than there is by animal agriculture. Just the biggest, the biggest agricultural export of the world. What's the
Who
biggest
is
agricultural
export of the world? I don't know. Is it California? Because we're close.
I know it's.
We grow a lot of rice here.
Yeah, no, but the biggest agricultural export of the world is topsoil.
Oh, topsoil. Oh, yeah. Yes.
And it's just exported via the wind and the rivers, and it's just thrown out in the ocean.
Yes.
You can look down to the south of the US in that, and look at a satellite.
We have a similar problem here in California as you do where you are, and that is out of control forest fires. It's almost like now we have a fire season, which is an incredibly unhealthy season in the heat of summer, and the soil, there's no topsoil, and it can't hang on to any moisture. So we've got fires that are out of control because we don't have enough of the right animal, right, in the field, sequestering the carbon as well as the water. We have no topsoil. We have fires out of control. I want people to realize that it is incredibly unusual. I want their perspective to change. As you drive down the central part of California and you see all these crops, this is about as foreign and about as artificial as the windmills you see spinning, right? We need to bring back what would actually save the environment, which really would be the cow, and in a way that you are rotating your fields, but we wouldn't have the full-on, the most unhealthiest. Like you've waited all year for summer, and then we are plagued with one fire after another. And I think you're experiencing something similar. Is that correct?
Well, absolutely. But on a proactive stance, the Australian meat industry has tried to and has offered to run their cattle through the forests. Not overgrazing, but to run the cattle through to actually keep the dry grasses down, create divots in the ground from their hoof prints, which actually become pools of water. This is just the start of regenerative agriculture. But actually well-managed forests with animal agriculture reduces the fire risk, improves the quality of the soil, improves the absorbability. It is a complete no-brainer when you start looking at it. We've got plenty of food on the planet. The third biggest emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet after China and the US is food waste. Of the vast majority of it's plant-based. I mean, it's arse about all of that. Like, it came back to vested interest. How do you find out? If you've got, one of the good things about the US is you've got a thing called the Sunshine Act. And the Sunshine Act says that if someone publishes something, they have to put their conflicts of interest down the bottom. So a lot of the Australian people that we've been able to track down, it's because they've published papers in the US and we've been able to find out, okay, you've got a conflict of interest with that. Now, that conflict of interest generally is financial. It's very rarely that they write down their ideological ones. Now, we've been doing a lot of calling out of that.
No.
One of the American Heart Foundation groups published a particle about the benefits of plant-based. But in the conflict of interest, and it's a rarity, they actually wrote down, I'm a full-time vegan, I'm part-time vegan, I'm 99% vegan. It's the very first time ever ideological evidence has been. The submission papers for the US diet, US dietary guidelines, the Australian ones, on the benefits of vegetarianism, and we're going back some decades, they failed. All of the authors there failed to declare what their ideological conflicts of interest were. They didn't have any major financial. But if you went down the list on the US one and took a bit of tracking, every one of them, so there was one person from the processed food industry, everyone else was a vegetarian, of which 8 out of the 10, 7 out of the 10 were Seventh-day Adventist. So when you realise that the Seventh-day Adventist
That's what we're looking at for the 2025 guidelines.
I know you've got, and we've again, you can actually look at the guidelines committees, and the people who are on these committees are either working for the food industry, have had significant funding from the food industry. We'll say the Seventh-day Adventist is a corporate church food industry. And
so
here in Australia, the same thing. We've got a review of our guidelines coming. I told you I wrote the guidelines in one sentence before. That was submitted to our National Health and Medical Research Council. I said, look, you're going to spend $10 million on this. For $2 million, I'll do it. Here it is in one sentence. But they didn't take me up on it.
No.
Could have done with the $2 million. But every person who's on the Australian committee, bar one, has got funding conflicts that go back for decades to this whole sickness industry model that we've already got. The same thing goes with the US dietary guidelines. So Nutrition Coalition, Nina Teicholz and her crew, all you can do is just keep pointing this out. The guidelines are flawed.
Yes.
Here's one good thing about dietary guidelines, is they are irrelevant because dietary guidelines are for healthy people. That's what they said.
It excludes 90% of the population. Yeah. They want to make it more complex too.
It's 92.7% of the US population are metabolically unwell. So the guidelines are only applicable to barely 7%. So a lot of and the trouble is dietary guidelines determine what people are educated with, what food's served in the schools, the hospitals, the nursing homes, the defence forces and the prisons. And, the US defence forces are struggling the same as much as the Australian ones. As you've got increased weight problems, obesity, metabolic health. And so I've taken the different tack of saying, okay, let's embrace the dietary guidelines and dismiss them because they're not relevant. So if we then end up with a specific dietary guideline for diabetes, for instance, then that's good because we've got a dietary guideline for 2/3 of the population who've either got diabetes or pre-diabetes. So we've surreptitiously introduced a dietary guideline which is actually condition specific. But guess what the dietary guideline is for mental health? It's exactly the same. Low carb,
completely
keto.
Opposite.
No, it's exactly the same. But what we do is we literally just change it. We change the heading. This is a dietary guideline for mental health disorders, and change the references. This is a dietary guideline for chronic renal disease, but change the references. It's the same frigging
inflammatory
guideline.
bowel, right? Autoimmune, everything. Yeah.
And literally, that's what the Society of Metabolic Health is doing.
You've made progress, though. Australia's making progress. I'm impressed.
Oh, yeah,
I didn't think it was going to come from a regulatory agency. If you were to look into your crystal ball of the future, what do you see? Is this going to be like consumer driven and consumer demand that's going to say, hey, we want more low carbohydrate. We need more animal based foods? Because I don't see it happening any other way, but you might have more experience in this field because you've been trying to influence policy.
We've been supporting grassroots influencing policy. And I was surprised, but policy literally fell over. And COVID was good, in a strange way because certain meetings were occurring, and there were people that we were working with that were inside those meetings, and you could, inside of a meeting, they could turn off their microphone, turn off their camera, and give me a call or give Belinda a call and say, "You wouldn't believe what so and so's just said," and then we'd be able to give them the background information or call them out on this, call them out on that. So they'd turn their microphone back on, turn the camera back on, blah, blah, blah. And we go, yes, okay, got screwed you because you just called them out. So, look, it's been a lot of hard work, a lot of frustration, a bit of fear. Like you actually saw, Belinda and I actually, have that conversation. Well, before 2017, I can remember at CrossFit giving a talk on the vested interest. Greg Glassman asked me to come and speak. He asked Tim Noakes as well. And that was the very first time we called out religion in this whole, it was a talk called The Central Role of Nutrition and Everything, which is talking about food, environment, politics, health, education, communication. And it's once you actually realise that nutrition has been completely manipulated by vested interests for 100 years, and then you can see how, I mean, I'll argue that, that environmental disaster of our loss of our agriculture, soil actually comes down to, bad guidelines. There's a great book called Dirt, The Failure of Civilization by Montgomery. What's his first name? Colin? No. By Montgomery, Dirt, The Failure of Civilization. Great book where it actually tracks down the failures of multiple civilizations over a period of time related to their agricultural practice. Jared Diamond does that in a lot of his literature as well. And I've been reading that stuff for decades, but it's just quite fascinating to see it all coming together.
Yeah.
That it's playing a role in politics and whatever. But our modern era of mismanagement of our soil, the health of the soil, the health of the people is determined by the health of the food. The health of the food is determined by the health of the soil. It's just an extrapolation of a Teddy Roosevelt quote. And
that's why we're always so hungry for more, because we're not getting the nutrients. And we can't stop the hunger because we're not feeding.
Our fertilizing practice, particularly potassium going into the soil, binds to magnesium. So the grasses our animals eat, the food that we eat that comes out of the soil is deficient in magnesium. So that's one supplement which people might need to be taking more of.
Yeah, we're quite deficient. Most of your patients in the hospital, I'm sure you tune them up a little bit before surgery by giving them potassium, magnesium that they're typically deficient in. We're not taking enough of it.
Oh, look, the amount of improvement, and I'll look more at diabetic foot complications because that's really the end stage. And I would say, I got into trouble. I would prescribe two eggs and cheese on the medication chart because they couldn't get protein in hospital. And I'd say, look, if you actually, I'd say, here's the breakfast menu. Show me the protein.
Yeah.
There's some in milk.
Yeah.
I said,
I would tell the diabetic. Yeah. I would tell the diabetic patients, ask for extra protein. Make sure you get.
No, ask for protein. I'll give you a hot tip. I've just seen the dietary advice for the Australian Olympic swimming team. Have protein in the form of plant-based garbage. I mean, you just got. There's one slice of ham in the document. I'm sorry.
I can think of a small child in my family that really didn't do well on pea protein infant formula. Ended up with a liver biopsy. Not good. Yeah, it's no. Plants just will always be deficient. We just have to get that into our head. It's going to be devoid of all the nutrients that we need.
Well, it's really simple. Like in nutrition, you need a complete. You need what's the definition of a healthy diet to
Simple.
me? You need to have a complete set of essential proteins. You need to have a complete set of
Amino
essential
acids, right?
fats. You need to have a complete set of micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. You do not need a single carbohydrate. There is no biochemical pathway in the body that is dependent on ingested glucose or fructose. Fiber is a myth.
Yes.
By way of example,
so right, Gary.
2 or 3 years ago, there was a press release by the Assistant Minister of Health here in Australia, federal thing, talking about the benefits of fibre and that we needed to have more fibre in our diet. And it was a big press release. But at the bottom of the press release, it was written by Kellogg's.
Yeah.
So we've got our federal minister sprouting on about fibre, but it's been written by the breakfast cereal industry. We've got the breakfast cereal industry. We've got them on sugar. We've got them on carbs.
Right.
Their last bastion of defense is fibre. I have a personal belief, I can't believe it, this is a non-scientific statement, but a lot of research and volume of information and volume of noise and media around the gut microbiome, I suspect comes from the cereal industry promoting fibre. I'm not saying the gut microbiome is not important, but it is a byproduct of what we eat and what we ingest and what chemicals come into our body. And a healthy gut microbiome will be healthier if you don't put crap in it. And so...
Yep. All I can say about that microbiome is prove it. Good luck. You're never going to, it's going to be almost impossible. You have no idea how many organisms are doing, what's the right ratio. Like, if fiber was so essential, carnivores would never survive. People that are on a ketogenic, low fiber, I'm on a zero fiber diet now, and I've never had better bowel anything until recently. Until I got rid of the fiber, I had no idea. But you're right. It's just this is healthy, and it doesn't add up. And if you don't believe it, just experiment with it yourself.
I was
I look like I lost you for a second.
Just for a second. Belinda's your audience and everyone on the planet will be very thankful that Belinda has banned me from taking a photograph of what's in the toilet bowl each day and putting it up on Instagram. So this is a low fiber diet. This is a low fiber diet. This is a low fiber diet. So don't you dare. Just don't you do it.
Yeah. All I can say is soft and gelatinous. What is soft and gelatinous? I did give a lecture, but it's a good word.
I did give a lecture to a political party here many years ago on the way down to Hobart, just talking about how we can go forward. But by way of example, I was talking about effectively the number of microorganisms in the soil and the number of microorganisms in poo. And you realise there's as many living creatures in a tablespoon of poo as there is in a tablespoon of dirt, and that's about 7 billion.
Wow.
And so, therefore, that's as many. This is one of the arguments that there are as many living creatures in a tablespoon of dirt as there are human beings on the planet. So, when you till the soil, you destroy the living habitats of billions of creatures. So, don't tell me it's not causing animal. But to prove that, I stopped on the way down to Hobart in a paddock on a fence and climbed the paddock fence and got a fresh, big cow turd. Yeah.
Honey, hold this.
Like in a plastic bag, and then inside another plastic bag. And then we had to drive down
get to the lab
in the car, and Belinda's gone. She's told me I've lost the plot.
Yeah.
But I used it as a prop in the lecture. My only piece of advice, if anybody goes to the Royal Hobart Yacht Club, which is where I gave the talk, don't have soup, because I used one of their soup spoons as the prop to actually...
Oh, ladles.
The fresh cow poo.
Scoop it up.
As part of...
Oh, my gosh. Hey, we got to wrap it up. I feel bad because we've gone over an hour. And I want to talk to you some more, but this has been a lot of fun. Thank you, Gary, for coming on this program. This has been incredibly enlightening. I think anyone that spends their livelihood exposing conflicts of interest and then really making a difference where the rubber hits the road and helping educate as many people, as many physicians, dietitians, whatever, to try to understand that there is a way out. There is a way back to better health. And follow Gary. Where can we find you, Gary?
I've just lost you there for a second.
Oh, where can we find your work?
Well, thank you for your kind words. I don't know if they're warranted. We were just doing what we thought was right.
Yeah.
And I was raised with that. And Ronald Reagan once said that he wasn't smart enough to lie. Great quote. So if you just tell the truth and you stick by it, it's very hard to remember lies. So, I mean, that's all we've done. Is we found
too complicated otherwise.
Oh, just tell the truth, stick to it. And so we think we've done the right thing, and we think we're more right than wrong. Most of our look, I'm on Twitter. I sort of understand Twitter. We've got a little bit of exposure on Facebook, Instagram. We're not doing nearly as much as we were before. Most of the stuff, my talks, Belinda's talks, are mostly on YouTube. A lot of stuff we do now is have a chat to you, because you're going to have a different audience.
Oh, I love it.
We're trying to get outside of the whirlpool, outside of the bubble. Interestingly, I do some talks with the crypto people, because that they can think outside of the box, and that's again with
future.
It's anybody who's, as I often say, I don't know everything, but I do have an opinion about it. So it's, I'll live by that philosophy. If you're silly enough to ask me to come on here, Kyle, then it's your problem, okay?
And no, this has been fun.
And sometimes I get accused of polarizing people. I go, okay, but once you actually polarize a topic, you can actually start working out where you stand on it.
Right.
And so you don't have to follow us. You just educate yourself. That's what people I say to people. Go forward.
Right.
Whilst you can, and whilst the internet is still relatively free, there is a breadth of information out there. But watch for the conflicts of interest. If someone's saying something which doesn't make sense, doesn't resonate with you, are they wrong? Are they misguided? Do they know that they're misguided? And I think, but most important, keep challenging yourself. I keep coming back to, you've got the email.
Challenge everything.
Science evolves by being challenged.
Absolutely.
Life evolves by being challenged.
Right.
You evolve by challenging yourself. That's
right.
And that book of mine, right? The final comment, I suppose, is only dead fish swim with the current. Which I think is pretty important.
I like that because I feel like I'm paddling upstream half the time. Thank you so much, Gary. This has been super helpful.
All right, mate. Keep well.